Raging Bull is like a fine glass of wine. It gets better with age, unless you're the main character, Jake LaMotta, who, in that case, he just takes a turn for the worse. This movie is essentially a parable on how a man who is highly successful and highly ambitious can really plunge himself down into a downward spiral of depravity due to his own insecurities and his own explosive jealousy. Every aspect of filmmaking works super well in this movie. You have phenomenal acting across the cast, you have gut-wrenching sound design, and you have top-notch editing that juxtaposes slow pace with fast pace. However, the one aspect that stood out to me in this movie is the cinematography. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how this movie utilizes camera movement, composition, and lighting in order to convey brutality and isolation. So, without further ado, for the plebs out there that don't know what cinematography is, allow me to enlighten you with my oh-so-gigantic brain. In layman's terms, cinematography is the use of different visual elements, i.e. composition, camera movement, and lighting techniques in order to make the audience feel something in particular. Now, I've filled up my notebook with how brilliantly the cinematography is used in pretty much every scene, and obviously I can't go through all of them because that would take literal ages, so I'm just going to be going over the ones that stood out to me the most. What better way to start off with shot composition than the iconic opening scene in Raging Bull? My god, is this beautiful. But anyways, here we can see that Robert De Niro is on the left, whose head is completely shrouded in darkness, because right here we don't really see the human being. We just see a man trapped behind the cage that is the boxing ring. The only place where he can really get catharsis from all the trials and tribulations in his life. And we see that he is confined to these bars, and we see the rim light up at the top. We also see, by paradox, that when Jake is approaching the camera, he is actually getting closer to the left, also meaning that he is leaving the frame even though he's coming closer to the camera. Now, this I found to be really interesting because I believe this signifies that as Jake attempts to get closer to other people, he just simultaneously pushes himself away. He makes the attempt to get with other people and get close to them, but he is simply incapable based off of his own corruption. He yearns to have relationships with other people. He wants to keep a strong relationship with his family, with his brother, with his wife, everybody. But he is just so broken on the inside that he just can't help but to just pull himself out of the picture. Another thing is that Jake LaMotta isn't put on the left just so there's room for the text to be put on screen. Even though that is a nice effect, I don't believe that was intended for that very purpose. I think that it's supposed to emulate how on a timeline you would typically start from the left, and since he is on the left, he is signifying that he is on the beginning of his journey. Notice how in the opening scene we pointed out how spatial positioning was used to emphasize loneliness and isolation. Raging Bull also uses spatial positioning to convey consensuous relationships and opposition. Let's take a look at one example of this.
What are you doing? I just said don't overcook it. You're overcooking it. Bring it over.
You want your steak?
Bring it over. Bring it over!
Now, this is a scene where Jake LaMotta is having an argument with his wife. In order to portray progress or a successful path, we typically read from left to right, and therefore, when characters or objects move from left to right, that's supposed to convey a positive meaning. Now, take a look at this. Jake LaMotta is having an argument with his first wife, Irma, and he starts off on the right side of the frame. Now notice how the technique of short-sighted framing is used here, where Jake LaMotta is on the right side of the frame, and yet he's looking camera right, and there is not much space between him and the end of the frame, signifying a sense of being uncomfortable or losing power in a situation.
Steak. Can't wait for
The situation becomes a lot more hostile now. The wife has come up to him and is now provoking him. And then the table turns, literally, and figuratively, and De Niro is in the middle of the frame. He went from the right side to the middle, so he is losing progress here.
You bothering me about a steak, huh? You bothering me about a steak?
And then, to finish off this particular sequence, he is now on the left side of the frame, which is still short-sighted. As the characters in the scene get angrier and angrier, Jake starts off from the right, flips the proverbial table, and then is now on the left side of the frame. So notice how the short-sighted framing represents Jake's sense of uncomfortability, right? Now let's take a look at what happened just a few minutes after this altercation between Jake and his wife.
What's going on here? Hands.
The scene actually starts off with Jake LaMotta just complaining and also revealing his insecurities about how he's not going to be able to succeed in the big leagues, and also he has small hands, so that's representing another insecurity. And as he talks about that, he is on the left side of the frame looking towards the left side of the camera. Therefore, short-sighted framing is used again. However, when he starts to address his younger brother, more control of the situation is established, as now he's using long-sighted framing. So now his eye line is taking up more of the frame. This occurs for the rest of the scene as he addresses his brother. So now we have a contrast between short-sighted and long-sighted framing in order to portray how contentious the relationship is and also to display power dynamics. However, even though it's established that Jake LaMotta has control over his brother via the long-sighted framing, there is actually another instance later on in the movie, which is probably the most contemptuous and provocative scene in the entire movie, where spatial awareness is used differently to portray power. Let's take a look. So, as I've mentioned, Jake LaMotta has a tremendous problem with jealousy. And now we're at a point in the movie where he believes that his wife slept with his brother. So here's what's interesting here. We start off with a medium shot of Jake LaMotta's character, and he is on the left side of the frame using long-sighted framing. So his eye line is taking up more of the frame. Then it moves to Joey, the younger brother, who is looking at Bob De Niro, and his side is more on the short side of the framing. However, he is in the middle, which represents that he is not too far away from Jake, which makes sense because he is trying to cajole him into believing that nothing happened. But now, here's something interesting. Both of them have medium shots, right? But in the next shot on Jake LaMotta, he is now further away. This represents how even though his eye line is still stagnant, he's still taking up most of the frame long-sided, he is now smaller, representing that he is losing control and he is losing his confidence in the situation. Joey remains in the center, and another thing happens. We used to be at eye level with Jake LaMotta, but now we move to a slight high angle to therefore perpetuate, or rather emphasize, his weak nature.
I swear on our mother, I'm gonna kill somebody. I'm gonna kill somebody, Joey.
Well, go ahead and kill everybody. You're a tough guy. Go kill people.
Now we move to a low angle on Joey, who is now looking down as he is now continually getting angrier as Jake pursues him. Another thing to take note of is that now he moves closer to the right side of the frame, therefore enhancing the opposition between Jake and Joey. It's like this for a few minutes until Jake stands up to attempt to have more control, and we get a medium close-up on him yet again. He is on the left side of the frame, and he's looking down at Joe Pesci, of course, because he is taller. But now Joey is still at eye level. He's not portrayed in a high angle, which represents that Bob De Niro, although he might be physically imposing and attempts to control the situation, he really doesn't have as much control as he thinks he does.
You know what you should do? Try a little more fucking, a little less eating. You won't have troubles upstairs in your bedroom, and you won't pick it out on me and everybody else. You understand, you fucking wacko? You're cracking up.
The scene ends with Jake on the left side and Joey on the right side, which shows how this relationship progressively devolved over the period of the scene. So that pretty much showcases how composition is used in order to portray loneliness and also the devolution of relationships throughout the movie. Now let's take a look at another aspect of cinematography: lighting. In terms of lighting, the moments that stand out to me the most are the ones where Jake conveys peak moral and psychological decrepitude. So the first example is when Jake is about to fight Gennaro. Now let's give a little bit of context. Jake heard Vicky mention that Gennaro was a good-looking person, so this sparks immense jealousy within him, and therefore he asks his wife why she made that particular statement. Now, his decision of what he's going to do in response to this statement is conveyed through the lighting alone.
You ever think anybody else? When we're in bed.
I mean,
You know, like when we make love.
So the scene starts off with a broad light on Jake LaMotta's face on the left side of his profile. From my interpretation of this lighting, he is really trying to just get an understanding for this in a peaceful manner.
How come you said that thing about Gennaro?
what did I say?
You said he had a pretty face.
Never noticed his face.
Well, how come you said that then?
Since Vicky is shrouded by the shadow of Jake LaMotta, this represents that she potentially has secrets that she is hiding from his perspective. However, it also represents his looming presence that he has over her ability to live.
I don't even know what I said. I don't even know what he looks like. Go to sleep.
Of course, Robert De Niro isn't fazed by this. This is represented by the now Rembrandt lighting on his face, which, you could tell it's Rembrandt due to the little triangle underneath his eye. And this shows how morally conflicted he is now. And essentially, this represents that his decision is made, and he's going to pummel this kid. So now we're nearby the end of the movie where Jake has essentially lost everything, and he's at the lowest point in his life.
Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck your mother!
The scene starts off with him in the light, but as he loses more control throughout the scene, it ends with him being shrouded in the darkness. This is really interesting because it conveys how morally decrepit he is at this point in time and how remorseful he is on how he has went about life. This just goes to show how the use of lighting, although it may appear to be really simple and seamless on the outside, it really does convey deeper meanings once you really break it down and analyze it. Pretty much like everything else, but that's as far as I'm gonna go about lighting. And now for the third part, camera movement. Now, just like every other aspect in filmmaking or life in general, the way how the camera moves can dictate whether or not we find a scene to be impactful or not. In this scene, Jake LaMotta just made a victory against Sugar Ray Robinson, his greatest rival throughout the whole film. Now, he's pumping his fists in the air, the audience is cheering for him, so this is supposed to be a victorious moment, but very quickly, the camera just cranes upward and then just loses focus on Jake LaMotta and just focuses on the audience now, therefore just taking him out of the picture. Due to the camera movement and just completely losing the subject, the scene doesn't feel nearly as impactful as it could have been. But here's the thing. This was done on purpose. Let's contrast this to the next scene where he fights Gennaro. In this scene, he just completely pummeled Gennaro and rubbed it in the face of his wife. Since he won the match, obviously this is supposed to be a victory, but it comes off as more victorious because of the way how the camera slowly pedestals downward to put him in a low angle and also allows him to take up more of the frame. Therefore, this establishes a greater sense of power and significance that this event has to Jake LaMotta. This contrast really does dictate how impactful the scene is supposed to be, and it definitely works really well. Now we're going to be going through the masterpiece of a scene, that is his final confrontation against Sugar Ray Robinson, which signals decline of his career. We are essentially going to be going over all the aspects of cinematography now that we went through each one individually and break down why the scene is a masterpiece. So before I corrupt your mind with my point of view, you just watch this scene for yourself.
Robinson apparently fired, punched with a fare thee well, and rocked Jake LaMotta right to his heels.
Come on, Ray.
This scene is everything. Everything is done so well to the point of being immaculate. Let's take out the biggest things. So the bookends of the scene are two shots. At first it starts off where both characters are equivalent in the two shot, but then at the end of that onslaught, it ends with a two shot with Raymond in the foreground and Jake LaMotta in the background, signifying Raymond's new dominant stance. In between, no two shots used. Everything is just composed of one shot and many close-ups. At the beginning, Raymond has key lights and full lights shown all around him, as well as a slight high angle being used to show how weak and insecure he is in this situation. And that works in tandem with the actor's portrayal of the character. Then we cut to a cowboy shot of Bob De Niro, which zooms in slightly to represent that Raymond is now getting focus on the character. And then we go to easily the coolest shot in the entire film, and probably one of the coolest shots in cinematic history. We get the oh-so-famous dolly zoom. And you see, the thing with this dolly zoom is that it accomplishes so much. So let's break this down. It makes Raymond a darker figure, and now all the lights around him are now in the rear. So now these are REM lights to make him a darker figure in the frame. Then we also get lens flares that are directed right towards him, which essentially gives the feeling of target acquired. Then there's a slight pedestal to transition from a high angle to a slight low angle, which essentially just makes Raymond more powerful in this figure in tandem with his now dark status. Another thing is that all of this works in tandem to the actor's change of how he used to be nervous and unsure of himself, and now he is composed and confident. And all of this works simultaneously. That is why this is just so brilliantly done. We go from that to a medium close-up zoom in on Robert De Niro's face, which establishes a sense of doom that is about to come towards him. And then, of course, Raymond gets closer to the camera, taking up more of the space in the frame, and then it's just nothing but punching. These characters don't share any of the frames together. It's just composed of many brutal close-ups. A bunch of these shots blended up together, and then you get this glorious milkshake of a scene. And you also have the lights being flashed. There probably should be an epilepsy warning for this, but there are just so many flashing lights that work in tandem with the punches. Just Oh god, I'm sorry. It's just so, it's wonderful. I love it. This one kind of felt like it was from an anime a bit. It felt a bit outlandish, but it works. It's where it zooms in to a close-up on Jake LaMotta, and then it also moves from Ray, and you get this rising pedestal shot that also zooms in on his fist, which essentially dehumanizes Raymond, which now means that this final blow is going to be really impactful, which it is. Cinematography has been used brilliantly throughout this whole movie, but if you want to learn how cinematography can be impactful to a film in terms of all of the composition, the lighting, and the camera movement all together, this scene has it all. As I was taking notes and researching for this, it was really making me think of something, and it's something that I want you to think about too. Although what you're seeing on screen is important, I think it's also really important to focus on what you're not seeing. In the opening scene, you see that Jake LaMotta is on the left side of the screen. But why isn't he on the right? Why not the middle? Something to think about, right? In the final scene, why does he move off to the left side? Why not to the right? It's also imperative that you not just look at what's being given to you on screen, but to also think about what isn't being shown to you on screen. And when you do that, you uncover so many different, an infinite amount of possibilities that could have been done, but weren't. And then when you try to figure out why, I feel like that is how you really get a lot out of the movie-going experience. Thank you for watching, and before you go, I just want to give a quick shout out to this week's sponsor.